Hello and welcome to another Leica review. Today I wanted to discuss what to do if you are choosing photography equipment for your home studio or if you are seeking to do photography indoors. Now, there are also options as photographing outdoors. And basically, in the next couple of reviews, I'll be discussing how we can do photography using, for example, different types of light sources. And I will be discussing, for example, photography using continuous light versus flash. And these all have benefits, they also have some limitations. So basically, we begin by talking about how to choose the right light source for photography. Now, photography requires light. Light between shadow and light is what creates contrast, and that is what we want if we are going to create something artistic or something interesting. And it is for that very reason that the light source that you use will define the way your images are going to come out. Now, there are certain types of photography that require that you use flash, and flash is very important if the subject is moving fast. Now, that could be, for example, a person running or a person performing a certain type of physical activity. It could be sports. It could be even fashion, where somebody may be turning around with their garments and you want to freeze the action. This could stretch into the territory of, for example, if you're doing creative work as a food photographer, for example, you want to catch the dust particles or flour being spread up in the air, or it could be the food particles being thrown up in the air where you want to freeze the action to create this beautiful imagery, which is often done to create images for commercials, especially for beers or alcohol commercials. And this is something that people often wanted to imitate by using certain types of lights. Now, that requires a specific technique. It requires certain settings in the camera, which I'll also be discussing in the future reviews. And also, what we want to know is how powerful the flash has to be in order to be able to freeze action. These are things that are of utmost importance if you are going to do photography. And photography in itself, it requires you to have certain considerations. But certain times when you want to photograph, there, for example, stationary subjects like a car that is in stationary position, or if you are photographing food that is not going to move, or landscape for that matter, you want to use continuous light. And continuous light in certain aspects has a lot of benefits. One of the main benefits of using continuous light is that you are going to see what you are going to get at as a final image without having to make adjustments, having set your aperture and your shutter at the appropriate settings. And all you need at that point is a light meter, which will allow you to accurately determine the amount of light that you have in versus to what your camera needs to accurately compose that image. And for that, using a light meter is crucial. Now, there are multiple types of light meters, and I will discuss those as well and how to use a light meter. But I would recommend getting those light meters that allow you to use it both for photography and video if you are into video as well. Now, if you only have the camera and you do not have, for example, a light meter, you still can use your camera to capture that image, because your camera can read the light and know the proper exposure settings to get what you want. But personally, if you want to take your photography to the next level and become more proficient at using cameras and knowing how to operate the camera better, you would like to go to a manual setting where you allow to set the exposure based on the aperture and the shutter speed and the ISO within your camera, and that is best determined by using a light meter. As I said, you can do these things just using your camera. So getting back to using the light sources, the light source that is very, very important is the quality of light that you will have. Now, as you know, each light source, whether it is a flash type of photography or a continuous light, will have a certain temperature, and that certain temperature will affect the mood of the photograph. So if you want to get the right mood and right temperature, then you will have to know the settings under which you are photographing. Now, one of those best ways to measure that is called a color meter. And there is a whole bunch of color meters that are available, the most popular being the Sekonic. And I'll put some links down below for my favorite color meters and also for my light meters that I use in my professional work. So you may be able to acquire those. Now, on the other side, we also want to make sure that what we have within our camera as the temperature setting is matched with the environment of what we are taking photograph of. For example, if you are taking a photograph and you select, for example, tungsten, it's going to give a much different look if you have selected daylight, and especially if these temperatures are reversed. For example, if you are lighting for daylight and you're taking it in tungsten, the pictures are going to turn out very different than what you would do if you were taking it at correct color temperature. So that is another important considerations. Now, we are able to manipulate the color temperature within our cameras because that is going to give us ability to shape the image in the way we want. Maybe we want to have a bluish cast if you're photographing at night, or if you want to create a moody atmosphere, or if you want to create something that is more romantic, more pleasant, we may choose to opt to go to a color temperature that is pleasing with terms of, like, for example, more yellowish, more warmer tones by changing those settings. But personally, that is only an artistic decision that you will have to make. And for starters, for beginners, I always suggest that you set your color temperature to the correct color temperature that it should be. Now, for those, there are all kinds of tools, and the most appropriate tool is what we call the white card, which is 18% gray. There is a whole bunch of accessories available. I use X-Rite, which is one of the tools that goes with me everywhere. There are also larger gray cards that you can use if you're doing filming or other sources. That gives you a variety of options when you want to set it into your camera. And that is best done, of course, by knowing how to set the white balance in your camera. Now, the white balance settings is again another video which we'll cover as part of the tutorials that I provide free of charge on Leica Review. If you attend my workshop, of course, these are all things that I teach about how to use the light meter, how to use the gray card or white balance card, or how to use flash photography, or how to manipulate light in a way that will create creative artistic images. So getting back to choosing the right source, creative imagery requires that you determine what you're going to photograph and choose your sources accordingly. Some people, for example, want to have the ability to use light sources that are going to be both useful as, for example, for video functionality as well as for photography. In that respect, those ones that have modeling lights, for example, can be very strong, and that can provide proper lighting for you to photograph or make video at the same time. Now, there are other sources that you can use, like the continuous light. Like, for example, Peter Hurley built a career on doing photography as portraiture photography, or headshots as he calls it, and by using continuous lights, because what happens with abundance of lights, the pupils dilate and creates this beautiful eye color, versus, for example, using flash photography. and for that he long time used kinoflows. Kinoflows is some of the light sources that I use in films that I make, but are very expensive. So for that reason, other sources of LED lighting are appropriate. I provide some of those links down below if you are interested in those. But what is important is determining what you're going to use. So if your subject is relatively stationary, you can use a continuous light. You have to make sure that you have lit the person in the correct manner and created the correct environment to photograph that in. It does, however, require you to know how to shape light very well. A lot of people who start in photography lean on the fact that continuous lights gives them kind of the way that the picture or the photograph is going to turn out once they place the lights in certain points to light up the subject. But I think if you look at it from a perspective of a photographer, that is more difficult than using flash photography, even though flash photography does not give you the exact look. But what happens with photography when you do continuous lights is that you have to know exactly the ratios, you have to know exactly the color temperature, you have to make sure that you are creating a certain mood or the feeling, and you have to be able to shape the light by various modifiers. So those are all key factors that has to be considered when using continuous light. So personally, I use them both for different types of photography. For example, when I do product photography, I like to use continuous lights because I know the subject is going to not move. So if I'm photographing, for example, jewelry or a watch or some sort of product, then I know setting the right exposures in my camera is going to give me as much leverage as I could possibly have in shaping it. And the shaping comes from the light that I use. So I will direct the light source. Maybe I want to use multiple layers of diffusion to create a soft light, or I might want to have more contrasty image by using, for example, a harder light. That all depends on your artistic expression in terms of how you want to photograph it. Some of the most difficult things to photograph is, for example, hair or jewelry that has multiple dimensionality, especially if you're, for example, photographing diamonds or small objects. This becomes particularly important. For that, I see, like, for example, pioneers like Carl Taylor, who does a lot of this kind of photography in a creative way. I suggest that you watch some of his videos to get an idea. For that, I think the best way to approach it is to look at objects as subjects and say, okay, how would I want to create a character for this? So if it's a perfume bottle, maybe you want to have a light source that is falling on it and creating a shadow or creating a color that is falling from within the bottle to create that look. It could be done on a product like an alcohol bottle, maybe a whiskey, where you have this beautiful golden hue light that comes from the bottle itself. So these are all options that can be considered, and those are things that also will make your photography unique to you, that will separate your photography from everyone else's. So that is also important. Now, you're going to probably want to know what kind of sources that I use. Well, there are two basic companies that have been the world leaders. The one of them is Profoto, the other one is Broncolor. I have been using both. My preference, more or less, is the Broncolor, because they are have certain advantages when it comes to being light sources that have open light bulbs that will allow the light to reflect better in an umbrella or a parabolic umbrella. And for those, they have, Broncolor has probably the best in the business. Now there are also Chinese versions like Godox and all the other ones that require you to make certain amount of purchases and stay within their own lineup. but those are far less as an investment point of view, cost less, so that you can buy those and start your photography. Alternatively, there are companies like Airbnbs, Einsteins, and all those other sources that are, you know, relatively good and have been used for many years by even professionals. Personally, if you have the funds, if you can afford it, go with companies that have a reputation for shaping lights that are being used by professionals. And for me, those are the key factors, because when you buy photography equipment, if you're going in the business for 20 years, 30 years, you can still use those equipments that you purchased 20 years ago. Certainly, I have used equipment that were 25 years old, 20 years old, that have incredible value because they still operate like the day they were first purchased, and that is because they use very good quality of parts. And that's one of the key factors that I consider. I buy things because they last. Now, one of the things I want to show you is, for example, this one here. This is a Broncolor light, as can be seen, and this Broncolor light that I use is a Cirrus L800, and this is one that I personally like because this one I can travel with. I can put it into its own case and take it to Europe, to United States, to Far East Asia. And these are things that can travel with me. The reason I like that is because they provide 800 watts. 800 watts, I can pretty much overpower the sun if it needs to be, with more or less 2 lights or 3 lights. And they come in two light kit, 3 light kit. I have a whole bunch of them. Those are the ones I travel with. And the fact that they have modeling light, which allows me to shape the light in the way that I want before I release the shutter in my camera. And of course, what I personally prefer these over other brands is the fact that the light bulb is exposed, giving this beautiful, gorgeous light, beautiful rendition of color, covering the total of the umbrella. The best way to determine if the umbrella is good and the right one for you is take a picture of the umbrella, see the photograph, and see if you have a hot spot in the middle. That's not your umbrella. That's not your light source that you should be using. What we have seen is, like, for example, the flash, the way it works, the on-camera flash, is that the flash is in the back of this long unit, where the flash leaves the front of the flash unit and then spreads. What happens with Broncolors is the light bulb is exposed so that it allows the light to go out evenly and beautifully and spread, rather than be funneled through a kind of a shaft. So for me, that is a critical factor. Now, there are, of course, advantages to that. There are also disadvantages because the light bulb is somewhat exposed. And if you knock down your lights, you could break it, but so could happen in multiple scenarios. There are, of course, smaller light sources, smaller units that are produced by Profoto or other ones. I personally think that if you're going to do serious photography, you need to have a unit that is going to be powerful enough to meet a variety of circumstances. It is for those reasons I use those. Right now, I'm being illuminated by these 2 Bronco modeling lights, and those are the only ones that I'm using right now to create this video. So they are going to be optional. There are going to be situations where you would want to, for example, use these lights to make your video, and that's an option that a lot of people want to have. Now, on the side of choosing continuous light, that is a critical factor, and this is what I would suggest to anyone who's looking for critical lights. Do not buy cheap lights. And cheap lights, they break down, they have trouble, and there are no parts to replace them. So that is an investment you need to consider. And what I consider as good brands are things like, for example, Kinoflows, Aries. Those are really good quality. But if your budget is not up there, there's still like light panels that you can use. There are, for example, good quality LEDs that have come out recently that are more affordable from, for example, Westcots have these roller type of masks that you can frame it and then photograph it. Peter Hurley actually uses those now because those are easier to travel with. No, those are also expensive, but they are a worthwhile investment because first, the color accuracy is very high. Secondly, they are easy to travel with. And thirdly, you can adjust the color temperature to suit your needs. For example, you don't have to shoot at 5500. You can go down to 3600 if your circumstances require to have those colors. And for me, that is a very, very important decision when I'm photographing. And of course, there are a whole bunch of areas that we can delve into of why a certain type of flash will work in a certain scenario, which we'll probably do once we get to a specific circumstances and discuss those. But for now, basically what I would suggest to you is if you're starting photography, you can go with continuous lights. I have links down below, you can check them out. And if you are going to do that as somebody who's going to do indoor photography, those are ideal. If you're going to do flash photography and you want to use flashes, for example, from Leica that are on camera, or if you want to use, let's say, SF60, which has a remote where you can put these units in a bunch of different locations to light up the scene, that is also an option. There are also factors on how to choose that. There's a number flash units, and that is going to also play a critical factor. For example, the one that is of good quality is 195, 197. Those are numbers, flash numbers, that is critical, but those I think will be a discussion to something else. So if you're going to use flash, begin by using flash that is off camera to give you the way to shape the light, because on-camera light is usually too direct and is not able to maneuver the light source sufficiently to create a certain look. So it is for that reason I recommend using off-camera flash. There are a whole bunch of brands and products you can choose. For Leica, the way to do it is if you're going to go with brown color, they have what they call RF2, RF2.1 receivers. You can put those on the camera and it will just take photographs for you and be able to adjust accordingly. And they also have what they call a brown color app where you can change the settings and the flash durations and all kinds of factors to allow you to shape the light. And that is a critical one to consider when you're purchasing it, because those are going to add up at the end. For example, there is a significant difference between purchasing a Profoto unit as a flash trigger versus a Broncolor. Broncolor is a lot cheaper, but they provide just about the same thing. If you're going to go with the Profoto, they have A1 that's very good, B10 that's very good, A2s are very good. These are all portable ones. Unless you want to have these big boxes that you want to carry that require probably a studio that you want to use, and they cost far more. So what I like is the monolights where you can take those units with you as you travel. So if you have the funds, if you can afford it, go with buying 1 or 2 lights to start, and you can always add more. Do not look for buying 3, 4, 5 lights unless you are able to pay for all those and be able to afford them, because lights are expensive, but they last a long time. And for me, quality comes before everything else. So that's why I like to buy products that have a certain length of reputation as a professional light. This is the reason I go with brown colors. This is the reason I sometimes use Profotos. But for me, what is important is the light that is going to serve my needs. If I'm on the road, if I'm traveling, 2 Broncolor Cyrus 800 is going to do a wonderful job for me. If I take 3, it's going to give me a very versatile tool, and that doesn't take any much space than a luggage that I put on the plane as anything else that I have. So that is beautiful, and you don't have to worry about these big boxes that you need to carry around as power packs. So having considered that, check out the links, and I'll be talking in more detail about using flash lighting and continuous lighting in our future photography tutorials and reviews. And I thank you for watching. I'll see you in our next review.